Welcome to Beat Diabetes. We're going to be talking about the relationship between weight and type 2 diabetes. Notice I didn't say type 1 because there's really not much relationship between a type 1 diabetic and weight. Many of them are slim. But in type 2 diabetes, most are not, although some are. So it does get a little bit complicated. Weight and diabetes. I want to start with a quote from a man that I greatly respect, named Joseph Kraft, who wrote a classic book on insulin, insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia, and basically said, if you don't get an insulin test, you don't really know where you are. You can't just depend on a glucose test. And so he was way ahead of his time. He was saying this back in the 70s and 80s and continued. I don't know if he's still alive or not. But I've read his book, or at least read parts of it. It would be honest, it was a little bit dull. But at any rate, he has a lot of good things to say. And it was interesting that this man, who is such an expert on insulin, insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, diabetes, such an expert in all these areas, struggled himself with it even after he became an expert. So here's what he has to say about that. He says, to practice what you preach is a difficult axiom to live by. In 1973, I had my first glucose tolerance test with insulin assays. To my surprise, I had an impaired glucose tolerance with hyperinsulinemia. I should not have been surprised, he says, for I was overweight. Over the next 25 years, I had many glucose/insulin tolerances. They would vary between, and he uses some fancy words, but basically he's saying they would vary between hyperinsulinemia and normal. The variations were directly related to a weight fluctuation of 5 to 10 pounds. Now, that's what just staggered me, and I've never forgotten that. I think it's a quote everybody ought to know. He's saying sometimes I would be insulin resistant, sometimes my insulin would show that I had metabolic problems, other times I would seem normal, and he said the thing that seemed to determine that was my weight, and it could vary between 5 to 10 pounds. 5 to 10 pounds, folks, that's not all that much. When I read that, I was just shocked to think that 5 or 10 pounds could make the difference as to whether you're insulin resistant or normal. But that's what Joseph Kraft found. And then I've shared before, in fact, I did an entire Beat Diabetes episode about Jerry Mathers, who played the Beaver in Leave It to Beaver as a children's, I say children's program. Actually, adults liked it as well, but it was back in the late 50s and early 60s. And Jerry Mathers became, as an adult, a diabetic. After he got out of television, he got into a catering business, and he was eating all the time, demonstrating his foods and having meals with clients. And he sometimes would eat 4, 5, 6 meals a day, enjoying his own foods that he was supplying, and became very seriously overweight. And so he got shocked when a doctor told him, if you want to live to see your grandchildren, you're going to have to lose some weight and beat this diabetes. You're going to have to break through in this area. And he had a hard time doing it. Finally, he joined Jenny Craig, and that helped him some. He ended up losing 90 pounds, and his diabetes went away. Now, when you hear him talk about diabetes, and he does it a lot, you can find talks he has given on YouTube. All you have to do is type in Jerry Mathers diabetes. And he doesn't say much about carbs at all. In fact, I don't remember ever hearing him say anything about carbs. He mainly talks about how he had to lose weight to overcome his diabetes, and he went into a pre-diabetic state, and apparently he's been there ever since. He's still alive. I think he's around 76 or so. But he talks about weight. That's the big thing with him. He also walks a lot. He walks a couple of miles a day, most days, I think. But his big thing is weight. And you can understand why he would make that a big thing, because he was told to lose weight. He did lose weight, and his diabetes reversed. He got back to a place where they said, well, you're pre-diabetic, you're not diabetic. So his big thing is weight, and there's no doubt about it. For a lot of people, the overweight people, obviously, If you can just lose weight, chances are you can do damage to diabetes. You can knock that monster backwards. So he says, I had no idea I even had diabetes. When he found out he did, he said, I wasn't sick. He didn't have any complications at that point. But when he lost weight, the numbers got better, and he was happy, and he's lived a good long while. Here's another individual who struggled with weight, and I don't know that she struggled with diabetes, but she died this year. Her name is Mandisa, and she is a Christian singer. My wife and I, we both loved her and do love her. I still play her songs. A great Christian singer, and she struggled with weight. It's ironic because the song she is most known for is called Overcomer, talking about in Christ you're an overcomer. And yet the one thing she couldn't overcome was her weight. She struggled terribly with weight, and at some points she was up close to 400 pounds. Big, big lady. And finally, some friends came over to her place that hadn't seen her in a while and found her dead, lying on the floor. Apparently, she had been dead in her apartment for a week or two. And so we were all wondering, what was the cause of it? She wasn't old. She was 47 years old. And finally, they came out with the cause of death, and they called it death related to type 3 obesity. That's odd. I've hardly ever heard any doctor declare as a cause of death obesity. Even though they may have been obese, they'll usually say it was a heart attack, or it was a stroke, or it was this, or it was that. But they just declared it's as a result of type 3 obesity. What's type 3? Well, it's when you have a body mass index of over 40 and what we would call morbidly obese. And what exactly was it that she died of, besides the fact she was overweight? Because some people are 400 pounds and they seem to live for quite a while. But we don't know, other than they called it death by type 3 obesity. Obesity is definitely a problem. And one of her interviews, she talks about how miserable she was when a friend of hers died, also at a young age. I don't recall what her friend died of, but she died. And Mandisa was struggling, and she turned back to food. She had lost some weight, but she turned back to food. She isolated herself. She didn't get out much, and she just ate and ate and ate. She said this, "You're battling shame, and you don't want to leave the house." Apparently, she became ashamed of her weight. She said, "I didn't leave the house for the most part. When I got up, I went downstairs, sat in the recliner, and watched television non-stop." Sad. This is a very talented lady, lovely lady with a great personality. But she isolated herself and became a TV watcher and a junk food eater. She said, "The only time I left the house was when I got tired of pizza delivery and decided to get McDonald's." So there's quite a choice of diet. Either pizza delivered to the house, or you go out to McDonald's quickly, you come back, turn on the TV, and you eat. Sad, sad, sad. And when she died, all they could say as the cause of death was complications related to type 3 obesity. Or class 3, actually, they call it class 3 obesity. And one of the articles that talked about Mandisa and her death, it took up the issue of this class 3 obesity, and it listed some complications related to that, as they call it. This was according to Medline Plus. So here's what they say are complications related to class 3 obesity: high blood sugar or diabetes, high blood pressure, high blood cholesterol, heart attacks, bone and joint problems, strokes, and osteoarthritis. They list all these as a result or a complication of obesity. I would turn it around and say the obesity plus everything they mentioned is a result of metabolic syndrome. hyperinsulinemia, super insulin surging through your body constantly, causing you to gain weight, and be hungry, hungry. All of these things can result from metabolic syndrome, which means that if you can somehow beat metabolic syndrome and be an overcomer over that, you lessen your chances for all these other things, the hypertension and the obesity and the triglycerides and heart attacks and strokes and so forth and so on. They even mention some cancers as well, and many are saying that cancer feeds on sugar, blood sugar, and the best thing you can do for cancer, apart from eating healthy, is just make sure your blood sugar stays at a decent level, which will come when you eat a low-carb diet. So there's no question. Weight has a relationship with diabetes and so many other things on down the line. High blood pressure and cancers, even dementia. Now, here's an interesting thing that we need to add to this equation about weight and diabetes. And this is courtesy of Dr. Jason Fung. And Dr. Fung, whenever you hear him talk or you read his books, he seems very fascinated with this whole idea of bariatric surgery. He doesn't recommend it, but he thinks it makes a great point, and I think it does as well. Here's what he had to say. As in virtually all cases, type 2 diabetes completely disappears after bariatric surgery. Type 2 diabetes is entirely reversible, even in a 500-pound patient with a 20-year duration of disease. It is not only reversible, but rapidly reversible. In a matter of weeks, the diabetes disappears. Yes, it truly goes away. I mean, that's very powerful. And it tells us something about the relationship between weight and diabetes. He's saying within weeks of bariatric surgery, and you can't eat much anymore, your numbers become normal. And that's what he means when he says it goes away. The diabetes goes away. Your fasting glucose becomes normal. Your daily glucose level tests and so forth will be normal. It goes away. Now, your weight doesn't go away in a few weeks. You're still going to be very much overweight. It's going to take a while. It will eventually go away if you can maintain that low-calorie diet. But your numbers, your diabetic numbers disappear and you become normal. And what that tells us is that when a person is overweight, if you can fix all your diabetes just by cutting your calories, and that's really what bariatric surgery is all about, you just lose your appetite. You can't hold very much because your stomach is so small, and your numbers normalize within weeks. And what that tells us is it wasn't really all that weight clinging to your bones that was making you diabetic. Because if it was all that weight, you'd still be diabetic 4 or 5 weeks down the line after your surgery. It was more likely the sheer volume of calories and carbs that you were ingesting every day to maintain that heavy weight. If you weigh 450 pounds, 200 and some kilograms, it's going to take you a lot of eating and a lot of carbs to keep it that weight. And so you're constantly shoving in the carbs and shoving in the calories, more carbs, more calories, more carbs, more calories. And if the carbs and calories stop, and I don't mean entirely stop, but less carbs and less calories. So if you go from 400 grams of carbs a day down to 30 grams of carbs a day, your diabetic numbers are going to normalize quickly. Eventually, you'll lose weight as well. And after 6 months, 9 months, a year, whatever it takes, you will normalize in your weight. But the good news is, if you're overweight, significantly overweight, you don't have to wait until you get down to 170 or 150 or 130 before your numbers normalize. They can normalize in a few weeks if you just stop taking in all those carbs. And my personal feeling is it's not really the calories that's doing it, it's the carbs. Because a lot of times when you see a morbidly obese person walking along, and maybe they weigh 400, 500 pounds, you say, I'll bet they're diabetic. especially if they're middle-aged or beyond. If they're 25 and very obese, they may not be. But if they're middle-aged or beyond, and they're big, 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 you can safely say likely they're diabetic. Not all the time, but likely they will be. And that will be true, but not so much because of all of this flesh that's hanging on them. It's because of the constant daily carbs they're ingesting. Hundreds of grams of carbs, 300, 400, 500 grams of carbs per day, 100, 200 grams of carbs per meal, plus a lot of snacking going on. And all those carbs are driving up blood sugar, driving up fasting glucose, driving up A1C. So it's not so much all the flesh, it's all the carbs. Well, the solution for either A, being overweight, or B, having diabetes, or C, being both overweight and having diabetes, is this: a diet that will not leave you hungry all day long, but you'll still lose weight. Wouldn't it be wonderful if there was a diet that would do that? You're not constantly craving food and snacks and extra meals and huge portions. Wouldn't it be awesome if there was a diet that wouldn't leave you hungry all the time, and yet you'd still lose weight? I mean, that would almost be so easy you'd feel like it was cheating. And the good news is there is such a diet. It's called keto diet, or as some would call it, a low-carb, moderate-protein, high-fat diet. And it has such a satiating effect that you're not hungry all the time. You can go from one meal to the next without needing snacks. And in fact, sometimes you may get to a meal and you don't even feel all that hungry. You just take a tiny small amount of food for that meal. So the low-carb, high-fat, moderate-protein diet is the ideal solution for diabetes and for overweight people. And if you're thin, then you're going to have to eat a lot of nuts and cheese to kind of make up for the fact that you will normally lose weight. Now, let me give you one warning. When you start to do keto, low-carb, high-fat, when you start that, you will lose weight automatically. You will not have to try. You won't have to use willpower. You won't need to. It'll just come. And that will last, my friend, for 6 months to a year. And you'll be so thrilled. You'll be telling people, man, I lost weight. I don't even feel like I was on a diet. I wasn't hungry. But the day will come when you'll start to plateau. And if you plateau above where you really need to be in terms of weight, then you may have to use some self-control. And I know that's a dirty word these days. And a lot of people say, just go keto and you'll never need self-control. Well, you won't for about the first 6 months to a year. But after that, you learn so many keto recipes and so many keto desserts, and you'll kind of get in the rhythm of eating keto, and your body will start getting used to it. And if you don't watch it, you'll start to bump back up a bit. So ultimately, sooner or later, you're going to have to make friends with the word self-control. But the good news is, whether your issue is fatty liver, or whether you're vastly overweight, or whether you're thin on the outside and fat on the inside, whatever it is, you've got to cut those carbohydrates. If you're skinny and you say, well, I've got to have some weight to me, again, eat some high-calorie fats like cream and butter, and nuts are very fattening. I've learned that for sure. And cheese is very fattening. So there's a way to manage keto, even if you're skinny, and not end up looking terribly thin. But one way or the other, you've got to keep the glucose low, which means you're going to be keeping the insulin low, which means everything is going to be just fine. I want to remind you that we've grouped certain videos together into series that are available for you to download on your phones or computers. Out of the many hundreds of videos I've made about diabetes, I've put together 3 series that I consider to be the most important and fundamental for the newly diagnosed diabetic who is desperate to get their blood sugar down in a hurry. First is the original series I call the Diabetes Emergency Kit. Second is the series titled More Fundamentals of Beating Diabetes. And third is my latest series called Beat Diabetes in 6 Months, and these are videos specifically created from our Beat Diabetes challenges. There'll be a link in the description that will take you to where you need to go to purchase any one or all 3 of these Beat Diabetes series. You can watch the videos immediately on your phone or computer, and you can also download them. Also, I give you permission to copy these files, put them on a flash drive, and share them with someone you care about.